Over the weekend in China, there were unprecedented public demonstrations against coronavirus lockdowns. The unrest followed an apartment fire last week, which killed 10 people. There are questions whether measures such as locked doors either hindered firefighters or trapped the victims. In response, Beijing says it will now ease some of its COVID lockdown rules. And joining us tonight with more on this historic protest is Brent Sadler, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Center for National Defense. Brent, welcome. Good to be with you today. Let's get right to it. This sort of uprising is really very unusual in China, really unprecedented, and it brings up memories of Tiananmen Square for some. How significant are these current protests? Can you put this in perspective for us?
Well, under the regime of Xi Jinping, he's actually been able to rule with pretty much a strong political position in Beijing. So it's remarkable during his tenure, but it certainly doesn't quite get to the level that we saw in 1989 with the Tiananmen Square protests, which lasted for a long period of time, several months, and then culminated with a mass killing in Tiananmen Square itself. We're not at that point. It doesn't look like it's going to get to that yet. Unless certain things happen. Right now, the police have been effective in stopping down or stopping any further protest. But the issue is growing and certainly is resonating with a lot of people in China.
Yeah, and Brent, for those that aren't familiar, can you fill us in on China's COVID policy and its rules?
Sure. So it's called COVID Zero, which means there's no tolerance. If you have COVID, you will be quarantine for up to 100 days in your apartment, or in some cases, people are being put out on the street, which doesn't make too much sense either, or in government-provided facilities. In extreme cases, there's stories, there's videos that you can also find that show government workers welding shut the doors to apartment complexes to ensure people adhere to the quarantine rules of that. There's also strict testing requirements. There's also apps that you have that if someone is tested positive around you, that your movements are also curtailed. It's an app that has a famous green or yellow screen on it, which indicates to people that control access to buildings or to public transit your allowance to enter or to pass.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the protests against these COVID policies. We know that crowds in China's largest cities, to include Beijing, and the roads have been blocked. They've been chanting slogans and clash with police. All of this, of course, in a communist country. Tell us, what is at stake for these protesters, and what type of consequences could they face?
Well, they live in a communist authoritarian regime that has a massive espionage and surveillance state network around it. So certainly going out and speaking against Xi Jinping and the Communist Party, you do that at great physical peril to yourself. And so that's what these people are kind of left with. They're at wit's end after months of these COVID policies and very totalitarian and autocratic policies coming out of Beijing. But at the same time, there's still not quite yet that spark that galvanizes the nation in unity against the Communist Party. It's still the ire is against local or municipal political leaders, Communist Party leaders, like in Shanghai or in Wuhan. But this fire in Urumqi does have the potential because landowners, people that have their own apartment, that have witnessing being kept inside, or even knowing people that have been welded into their own apartment complexes, it becomes very personal and it becomes very threatening to their well-being and their livelihoods as well. And so if more and more Chinese people identify that they are personally at threat, then this could grow much larger than Tiananmen Square. But right now, it doesn't look like that's the trajectory that we're on.
We have about 30 seconds left or so, Brent, but wondering if you can give us your final thoughts on what we see happening in China and where this might all go.
I think what you're going to see is Xi Jinping and the National Communist Party pulling back from local authority. You're already seeing some of that in the policies and allowing local leaders to make mistakes, as we've seen. So you're probably going to see an uptick of disgruntled but localized disgruntlement and protest. And that'll probably head off any national unity that looks to blame the Communist Party and Xi Jinping himself. That's probably the most likely outcome, but certainly the chances are not zero that there is a much more nationalist awakening against the Communist Party, too.
Well, Brent, thank you so much for your time today. Always great to get your insights. We appreciate it.